Some mornings don't start with panic, they start quietly. The alarm goes off, you reach over, turn it off. Before you even sit up, your hand finds your phone, not to check messages, not to see the news, just to look at one number. The balance, not because you plan to buy anything big today, just to make sure nothing changed overnight. The number is fine, enough for gas, enough for lunch, enough to get through the day, not extra, but not scary either. And there's a small exhale, almost automatic. Okay, today's covered, then the day begins. And what's strange is nothing feels wrong. You go to work, you do what's expected, you answer emails noted with a calm you've practiced. You're not thinking about freedom, you're not thinking about the future, you're just hoping nothing unexpected shows up. No weird charge, no warning light, no email that starts with, "Unfortunately." It doesn't feel like being broke, it doesn't feel like crisis. It feels like maintenance. Like holding something together with just enough effort to keep it from falling apart. And most people living this way don't look like they're struggling. They have jobs, they pay bills, they show up. But somehow year after year they don't really move. Not forward, not backward. Just in place. And it took me a long time to realize this, but that feeling, that constant need to check, to calculate, to brace. That isn't normal life pressure. That's a routine. A routine so common most people never question it. When people hear paycheck to paycheck, they imagine empty wallets, missed bills, red numbers. But that's not what this looks like most of the time. Most of the time it looks fine. Money comes in, money goes out, right on schedule, not early, not late, and that's exactly the problem. Because slowly, without noticing, your life starts syncing itself to the rhythm of your paycheck. Decisions don't happen when you're ready, they happen when the calendar allows it. You don't ask, "Is this a good choice?" You ask, "Can this wait until next pay period?" You don't think in years, you think in weeks, and after a while that becomes normal. Your brain adjusts. You stop planning ahead because there's no room to land. Every dollar already has a job before it even arrives. So money stops being a tool. It becomes a timer, counting down quietly in the background. And when you live like that long enough, something subtle happens. You stop driving your life and start steering around problems, not choosing direction, just avoiding impact. You get very good at it too, at knowing which expenses you can delay, which conversations to avoid, which risks feel too dangerous right now. And none of this feels dramatic. That's why it's dangerous. There's no single moment where things fall apart. There's no clear warning, just a low-level tension that never fully leaves. A feeling that life is always one surprise away from becoming complicated. And because it never explodes, you assume this must be how it works. That adulthood is just a long series of careful calculations. But here's the part most people miss. This routine doesn't trap you with money, it traps you with attention. Your mental energy gets spent on survival math, on timing, on staying balanced, and when all your energy goes there, there's none left to ask bigger questions. Not because you're incapable, but because you're tired, and tired people don't change direction. They just keep going. A normal day inside the routine doesn't feel dramatic. It starts with work. You show up. You do your job well enough. Not because you love it. Not because it fulfills you, but because it works. Because it pays. Because it keeps things steady. There's a quiet agreement you've made with yourself. I'll think about changes later. Later becomes a very flexible word. At lunch, decisions are small, but they add up. You glance at prices. You do the math without meaning to. You pick what feels safest. Not cheapest, safest. In the afternoon, you think about the future just briefly. Maybe a different role. Maybe a move. Maybe doing something you've thought about for years. And then another thought steps in. Now's not the time. It's not fear exactly. It's caution dressed up as responsibility. On the way home, you stop by the store. You don't buy what excites you. You buy what won't bother you later. At night, you sit down, scroll a little. You see other people changing things. New jobs, new cities, new projects. You don't feel jealous. You just wonder how they can afford to not worry. And then you tell yourself they must be different, more confident, more prepared, better at money. The day ends the same way it started. Nothing went wrong, and somehow that feels like success. But days like this don't move you forward. They just repeat, and repetition has a way of turning into a life before you notice it happening. What keeps people stuck isn't the paycheck. It's what the paycheck does to your attention. When money is tight, not desperate, just tight, your mind stays busy. Not with big ideas, but with small calculations. Should I wait? Can this slide? What happens if something breaks? Each question is harmless on its own, but together they drain you. There's a name for this. Decision fatigue. It's what happens when your brain has to solve too many small problems over and over again. Eventually it looks for relief, and relief usually means not making big changes, because change costs energy, and energy feels scarce. So you stick with what you know, not because it's best, but because it's familiar. This is how the routine protects itself. It doesn't need force. It doesn't need fear. It just waits until you're tired enough to stop questioning it. And the longer you live like this, the more it reshapes how you think. You stop asking, what do I want this life to look like? You start asking, what can I handle right now? That shift is subtle, but it's everything. Because once survival becomes the filter, growth feels irresponsible, risk feels reckless, and waiting feels mature. But here's the quiet truth. Living this way doesn't mean you're being careful. It means you're always reacting. You're not choosing direction. You're dodging problems. And when you dodge long enough, you forget there was ever another way to move. The routine doesn't trap you by taking something away. It traps you by never giving you space. Space to pause. Space to think. Space to decide without pressure. And without that space, even the smartest people stay exactly where they are. Not because they can't leave, but because leaving never feels like the right moment. Most people think escaping the routine requires something dramatic. A raise, a new job, a lucky break. But the people who actually get out usually don't start with any of that. They start with a quieter shift, a change in the question they ask themselves. Instead of asking, is this month going to be okay? They start asking, if something went wrong, could I handle it? At first, that question feels uncomfortable because it doesn't have a clean answer. But once it shows up, it doesn't leave. You notice it while paying bills, while planning weekends, while thinking about the next few years. And slowly your decisions begin to change. Not in big visible ways, in small ones. You stop pushing everything to the edge. You leave a little room. Not because you suddenly became disciplined, but because you got tired of being fragile. That's the real turning point. Not ambition, not motivation. A quiet refusal to stay one surprise away from stress. And when that happens, something interesting follows. Risk starts to feel different. Not exciting, just manageable. Opportunities that once felt impossible now feel conditional. Not I can't, but I could if that if is where space lives, and space changes how you move through the world. From the outside, the people who break out of the routine don't look extraordinary. They don't always earn more. They don't always work harder. Sometimes they're doing the same job in the same city as everyone else. The difference shows up in moments most people don't notice. When something unexpected happens, they don't panic. They pause. When a decision appears, they don't rush it. They consider it. Not because they're braver, but because they're not cornered. They've removed one thing that quietly controls most people's choices: urgency. And without urgency, clarity shows up. They're not smarter with money. They just aren't forced to make survival-based decisions anymore. That changes everything. They can walk away from bad deals. They can say no without explaining. They can wait. And waiting, real waiting, not anxious waiting, is a kind of power. Meanwhile, the people who stay stuck aren't doing anything wrong. They're just always responding. Responding to bills, responding to timing, responding to pressure. And response mode doesn't leave room for direction. Over time, this gap widens, not in income, in options. One person collects flexibility, the other collects obligations, and neither path announces itself loudly. They form quietly, one small decision at a time. The routine doesn't break because someone fights it. It breaks because someone stops feeding it, stops needing everything to line up perfectly just to feel okay. And once that happens, progress doesn't feel dramatic. It feels calm. And calm is usually the first sign that something fundamental has shifted. Here's the part that took me the longest to understand. Living paycheck to paycheck isn't about low income. Some of the most stressed people I know make decent money. Some of them make a lot. They live in nice places. They drive good cars. From the outside, everything looks solid. But inside, the same pattern is running. Money comes in. Money goes out. Nothing stays. And because nothing stays, nothing protects them. The problem isn't the number on the paycheck. It's the structure wrapped around it. When money arrives already assigned, already spoken for, already gone, you never get ahead of it. You just keep pace. And keeping pace feels responsible. It looks like adulthood until you realize how exposed it keeps you. When there's no space, everything feels urgent. Every decision carries weight. Every surprise feels personal. Not because you're bad with money, but because your system never gives you leverage. And leverage isn't about power. It's about choice. When money doesn't stay long enough to create a buffer, you stay reactive. You adjust, you adapt, you cope, but over time, coping replaces choosing. And slowly, almost without noticing, you forget what it feels like to have options. Not big ones, just the quiet confidence that if something changes, you won't immediately be cornered by it. That's what the routine really takes away. Not wealth, perspective. Living paycheck to paycheck isn't a sentence, it's not a failure. And it's definitely not permanent, but it is a habit. One that trains you to think short, to plan narrow, to stay close to the edge, without ever stepping back. Not because you don't care about the future, but because the present keeps asking for all your attention. If this is where you are, it doesn't mean you're behind. It doesn't mean you missed your chance. It just means you're living inside a rhythm that wasn't designed for distance, only balance, and there's a difference. The moment that rhythm becomes visible, it starts to loosen. Not because you suddenly change everything, but because you stop assuming this is the only way life works. You begin to notice how much energy goes into staying afloat, how many decisions are shaped by timing, not intention. And once you see that you can't unsee it, that's usually how real change begins. Quietly, with awareness, with the understanding that stability isn't the same as progress, and that a life built entirely around making it through the month will always feel smaller than it needs to be. Sometimes nothing has to move right away. Sometimes real movement starts the moment you realize you don't have to keep moving like this forever. And that realization alone can be enough to shift the direction of everything that comes next.